Good morning. Welcome back to Classical Mechanics 1 at CMI. This, I believe, is the 9th lecture on 21st October 2021. So we are still waiting for still 3 minutes to go. While we wait, are there, first of all, can you hear me?
Yes, you are audible.
Okay. Fine.
Sir, could you please just go over what does isolated body means again?
Aha. Okay, I will try to do that. Yes. Yeah, so an isolated body, or what we might call a free particle, is one that is, in practice, it is one that is far removed from other physical bodies, other bodies, so that it is not under other physical influences. So I think one needs to think of this in practice by getting, and it's a fact of experience in physics that macroscopic forces tend to decrease with distance, like gravity or the electric or magnetic forces. So in practice, it is possible by taking your particle far away from other charged particles or other massive particles bodies to make it more and more isolated. And our metaphor for that is a spaceship far away. Yeah, so in particular, you do need to make sure that there are no stray electric fields and magnetic fields present or other gravitational fields. So one needs to try to do that. Of course, one can be a little bit clever also, and though there may be some forces present, you might be able to cancel them out by suitable other forces that you create. Like if there is some gravitational force present, you might be able to cancel it by some opposing electric field or something if the particle is charged. Yeah, so when I say isolated particle, this is what I mean, but that's not the end of the story. It's possible to be a bit more clever and create, in effect, isolated bodies, even in the presence of forces by canceling them out. So for now, that is our working context of isolated body. I will say a little bit more about that in reference to Newton's first law and the idea of inertial frames. Yeah, so does that address your question, Shakti Chauhan?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Thank you, sir.
Okay. All right. So any other, I do intend to speak a little bit more on inertial frames, very briefly at least, which hopefully will address some of the questions towards the end of last lecture. But any other questions right now while we wait for, there are 41 participants now, while we wait, any other question? Okay. It has been noticed that some students have not submitted the second and third assignments. I have also written to some of them. So, please do submit the upcoming assignments. And in case you are not officially going to continue in this course, please do let me know. I have written to some of you. Was that Bijayan Rai speaking? I didn't catch your question. Okay. All right. Fine. Okay. So anyway, now while we wait, no further questions. Okay. Let me then share.
Sir,
Yes.
So we define the inertial frame to be the frame in which all bodies are in uniform motion. So what if the body itself is in the accelerated motion, but the frame is inertial? Is it possible like the frame is at rest, but the body which is being observed is in accelerated motion? So still we will call that frame an inertial frame.
Yeah. No, so what we said, I would like to clarify or correct your statement. Inertial frame is one where all isolated bodies execute uniform rectilinear motion or are at rest. So it's not all bodies. It is only ones that are isolated or free. You may have, so just a moment. So in an inertial frame, I mean, the Earth, to good approximation, is an inertial frame. Not every particle on the Earth is free. And many particles on the Earth, like golf balls and cricket bats, do not travel in straight lines. And that's because they do experience forces. But if you are able to cancel those forces out, then it should be possible to observe that they travel in straight lines with constant speed. If that is so, then we will say that the Earth is a inertial frame. So no, not every particle in inertial frame travels in straight lines or is unaccelerated.
So if there is a particle which like in which on which the force is applied at some point infinity, and it is like being observed with the inertial frame, like it is now it is moving with in a straight line with the accelerated motion.
Yeah, that is accelerated motion. Yeah, you are free to have a force. That is fine. It's just not a free particle. So it doesn't come under the purview of the statement I made. I only said that free particles in an inertial frame travel in straight lines with constant speed.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yes.
Sure. Yeah.
Thank you, sir. Thanks.
Sure. You are welcome, Shakti Chauhan. Okay. So now let me return to our discussion by sharing my screen. Okay. So I just want to recapitulate a couple of statements from last time. The summary statement is one I would like to emphasize. So to summarize Newton's first law is the assertion that there is a frame of reference called an inertial frame in which all isolated bodies, namely those that are far from physical interactions with other bodies, move at constant velocity. Okay. So this is what Newton's first law in somewhat more refined and careful form states. Of course, in practice, when I say the Earth is inertial, we have to decide for what purposes we want to treat it as inertial and which bodies we want to treat. So towards the end of last lecture, I did say that the Earth is inertial for the motion of tennis balls, cricket balls, I mean, falling buildings and such things. But it is not inertial if one is wanting to understand the motion of a spaceship or some other body, which is far away, and for which the rotation of the Earth becomes very important. Then it is not inertial for treatment of such bodies. So there are, when I say all bodies that are isolated, yes, strictly that is the thing. But in physics, we often have to put some restrictions to make progress. And that is why I say that Earth is inertial for the motion of tennis balls, falling trees and such things. It is not inertial for the observation of things far away, for which the motion of the Earth, the non-uniform motion of the Earth, becomes significant. So it is worth keeping that in mind. So strictly speaking, Earth is not inertial. But if we take such a strong view that Earth is not inertial, then well, all is lost then. We can simply say, no, we are going to treat Earth as inertial for certain purposes, but for certain other purpose, we will take into account the non-inertial nature of the Earth. I think that is a more reasonable viewpoint, which is what physicists normally take. Now, immediately the question arises, so I only said that there is a frame of reference called an inertial frame. The question is that frame unique? Or are there many such inertial frames? And as we will see shortly, from a principle enunciated by Galileo, an inertial frame is not unique. So if you have one inertial frame, you can generate other inertial frames from it. We will explain how that's done. Now, from here on, unless otherwise stated, all quantities will be specified with respect to an inertial frame of reference, just so that there is no confusion. But when we need to, we will say explicitly that we are considering a non-inertial frame. Now, there is one more important matter here of great practical importance. It is in continuation of the earlier statement I made that, okay, on the Earth, most particles do feel forces, gravity is present. So what do? Yeah, how do you check whether Earth is inertial or not? So there are many approaches. Yeah, it is not as though everything has to be isolated to check whether it is inertial. You can try to cancel some forces using other forces. So that is one very good strategy. But that is within the purview of Newton's first law. But it turns out that Newton's second law can also help in this purpose. So I just want to make a comment about that. Yeah, there are indirect ways, which I did not speak about last time, because we are going step by step. Talked about first law. So what can you do with the first law was the question. But now let me say that there are indirect ways to check whether a frame is inertial, even if one cannot isolate particles. Yeah, one approach I already mentioned, somehow cancel the forces. But there is a second approach. This approach makes use of Newton's second law. Yeah. So Newton's second law I have not yet stated. We will state it shortly. But just to give a preview, Newton's second law is a statement about inertial frames. So that we have to be clear about. Newton's second law holds in inertial frames. Yeah. So it is possible to use Newton's second law and its consequences to check whether a frame is inertial or not. Okay. So let me sketch how you might do that in principle. Roughly, suppose we assume that a frame is inertial. So let's take the Earth. We assume it's inertial. Then we deduce certain consequences using Newton's second law. Okay, so Newton's second law may tell you something about the trajectory of a tennis ball, or how projectiles move, or how collisions occur, and so on. Yeah. So we assume it's inertial. We deduce consequences about certain phenomena, physical phenomena, using Newton's second law as well as the first law. Yeah. Then suppose you find that those consequences are experimentally violated. Okay. Suppose this happens, then one possible explanation or reason for this discrepancy can be that the frame was not inertial to begin with. So you assume something is inertial, deduce consequences using Newton's second law, find those consequences are violated, then you can attribute the discrepancy to the frame itself not having been inertial. Of course, there may be other reasons for the discrepancy. Those reasons will have to be eliminated. Yeah, I mean, there may be experimental errors, there may be theoretical uncertainties, there may be other effects which you have ignored. But suppose you eliminate all those things and zero in on this one assumption that we assumed it's inertial, but still it doesn't agree with experiment, then we will conclude that, oh, maybe this frame was not inertial to begin with. All right. So this is a very nice way of checking whether a frame is inertial or not, but it requires an additional step, which is Newton's second law. Now, there is a very nice illustration of this, and this I will not be able to explain now. Something comes later, but I just want to give you a foretaste of that. Now, there's something called the Foucault pendulum. It's a kind of pendulum. I mean, just a pendulum that's hanging from a ceiling, which can swing in this room. But by observing how it swings, in particular the plane in which it oscillates, studying that gives a concrete realization of this idea. So in particular, we can make the hypothesis, Earth is inertial. A frame lab fixed in the Earth is inertial. We make that hypothesis, set up a Foucault pendulum, observe its motion, and find that the consequences, one particular consequence, it is that if you assume that it's inertial, it turns out that the pendulum plane of oscillation must be fixed. If you start out in a certain plane of oscillation, it must remain in that plane. So this is one consequence of Newton's second law and the assumption that the lab is inertial. However, if you do that and you find that the plane of oscillation does not remain fixed, that the plane of oscillation itself changes over time, then that would strongly suggest that the Earth is not quite an inertial frame, and that can eventually be attributed to the rotation of the Earth on its axis. All right.
So can I ask a question?
Yes. Yes,
So
Romit.
when we consider the Earth as an inertial frame, are we considering the Earth itself as a particle in that frame?
No. When
mean,
I said
when we're accounting for gravity.
No. When I say Earth as inertial, okay, let me be very specific. I am thinking of this room where I am sitting, this little lab, which is on the Earth, as an inertial frame. Okay, I'm not saying maybe you're thinking of the whole globe or some such thing. No, we are looking at terrestrial experiments performed in my little room or in your little home. When I say Earth is an inertial frame, I really mean a small lab fixed on the Earth. If the lab becomes too big or you start looking very, very carefully, then it will not be inertial. Does that, sorry, please re-ask your question if I have not addressed your question.
I'm sorry, my internet seems to be quite unstable. Can I rejoin and then re-ask? Because I didn't catch anything you said, sorry.
Okay, all right. Okay, so you will catch it in the recorded video, I hope. But yes, you are welcome to rejoin and ask.
So what should be like the approximate length of a pendulum to observe this?
Okay, no, I mean, it depends how accurate your observational techniques are to see the precision of the plane of the pendulum. So yes, in the Foucault pendulum in the Pantheon in Paris, it is quite long. I mean, the Pantheon is quite a tall ceiling, and it is tens of meters. So right. So to make it observable or in a reasonable fashion, you do need to make the pendulum length quite long. A very short pendulum, it will be hard to. I mean, it is there, but it will make it easier if it's a bit long.
The question that I had was when we're considering.
But I just want to clarify, this precession of this plane of oscillation of pendulum is independent of the length of the pendulum. It is just to make the observation a bit easier. This is a fact about pendula, no matter how long it is. Sorry. So that was Romit's question, was it? Or no, that was
Ripunjay.
Dwivedi's question. Okay, now can we go to the next person who was speaking?
Yes, sir, that was Romit's.
Yes, please.
I mean, this is Romit's. Like what I was asking was, when we approximate the Earth as an inertial frame, we're discarding the rotation factor. The Earth.
Okay, so this is your question that you asked previously, right?
So I'm asking about gravity specifically.
Okay, so first of all, I should be more clear when I say Earth is an inertial frame. I really mean a small laboratory inside my little cabin in CMI. That is what I mean by the Earth. I am not talking about the whole Earth as a big globe. Yeah, I'm talking about a small lab on the surface of the Earth, which is fixed on the surface of the Earth. I'm saying that such a thing, or a little tennis court or badminton court, that kind of thing is an inertial frame. And in such a frame, there is, you are very right, gravity does act over there. There is no avoiding that. But the presence of gravity is not something that will cause too much trouble if you're a bit clever. So you're right, particles are not isolated because gravity is present, but you can be a bit clever. You can somehow cancel out the gravitational force with some other force, or you can make the particle go very fast so that the gravity becomes less relevant. The kinetic energy may be so high that the force of gravity or the torque due to gravity may be small, and you can ignore it. So by being clever, it may be possible to within accuracies that you are interested in, eliminate the effects of gravity and effectively treat a particle as free, and then ask, oh, is it going in a straight line at constant speed or not? All right. So is that, but yes, if there are questions you are asking where the rotation of the Earth becomes important and you can detect that effect, then for those purposes, the Earth is not a frame fixed on the Earth. That is my little lab here is not inertial. So at the end of the day, it really comes down to the accuracy to which you want to make your predictions or your observations. That really is a very important factor in all of this.
Sir, if you somehow able to create a lab which is rotating in...
Excuse me, Shakti. I just was answering a question due to... no, I have forgotten who asked. Could you just let me know, whoever asked, whether that was adequate or there is any further question about it?
Yes, I think that's it.
Okay, that was Romit Roy Chaudhary. Fine. Okay, so yes, Shakti Chauhan, could you go on?
So if you somehow create a lab which is rotating in opposite direction to the Earth rotation, and that is gravity free, also the air resistance free, then will that be an inertial frame?
Okay, I mean, I didn't catch the full drift of what you're saying, but yeah. I mean, in effect, yes, you are proposing a way to somehow cancel the rotation of the Earth and cancel gravity. Yeah, you can do such things, and then yes, then your frame would become inertial to much better approximation. Yes, definitely.
But sir, there will still be the tension between the pendulum and like the bob.
Look, this is what I just said. Yeah. The question about a frame being inertial is not a question about particles that feel forces. It is about particles that don't feel forces. Yeah. So it is fine to have in your inertial frame lots of things that feel forces. Let them be. The question is really about one which is isolated. So if you create an isolated particle in that frame, does that particle move in a straight line or not at constant speed? If you can answer that question, then you can address the question whether it is inertial or not. There can be tension in other particles and so on. But maybe your question is that how can I ignore the tension when I am discussing the motion of the pendulum? No, you have to account for that.
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Yeah. Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Sure. Yeah. Okay. There is some question in the chat from. Okay. Okay. Romit says, I just wanted to clarify that we don't consider gravity as a force created by a particle, but as a general field force. Yeah. Okay. I mean, yes, the gravitational field of the Earth is a field of force. True. But of course, it is created by the Earth in a sense. Yeah. Maybe. If you want to clarify your question, you're welcome to do so. Okay, let me then proceed to Newton's second law, unless there are any urgent questions on what we have just spoken about. Yeah, okay. Yeah. So now we come to Newton's second law, which is yeah, let me keep a little bit of that. Yeah. So Newton's second law, which is one of the important achievements of humankind in understanding nature. Yeah. So what does it say? So far we've been talking about uniform motion along a straight line. Yeah. For free particles. So now Newton's second law governs the departure from rest or uniform motion along a straight line in an inertial frame is caused by forces. So this is the first statement, that departure from rest or uniform motion is caused by forces. Okay. And again, in an inertial frame. Because if you watch a free particle that is at rest from a rotating frame, it will not travel in a straight line. And it's not because it is feeling some force. Okay, you just were rotating. That was the reason. Okay, so just to begin with very basic concepts as to what this force may be. You see, we will not be able to give some precise definition of a force, right? We will operationally define it through processes that we watch and do and experience. So for example, tugging at a string that is attached to a ball exerts a force on the ball and it makes it accelerate. This is what we observe. Yeah. Forces typically arise from interactions between objects. So for instance, the earth exerts a force on a ball that is dropped. Okay, so I drop a ball, we say that the earth exerts a force on it, making it accelerate downwards. Yeah, so I'm sidestepping the question of what is a force. I am just giving you examples of forces so that we get used to it. Then we will give some equation and we will work with it. Yeah, now Newton's second law says that the rate of change of momentum, which is denoted P dot, the rate of change of momentum, namely P dot, is equal to the impressed force. Yeah, and in particular, that rate of change of momentum must be in the direction in which the force acts. Okay, that is an obvious consequence. Yeah, so this is the statement of Newton's second law. I said it in the previous paragraph, but this is valid in an inertial frame. So Newton's second law says that in an inertial frame, that's very important, the rate of change of momentum, namely P dot, is equal to the applied force. Yeah, so now for a single particle, the acceleration, which we have already defined as A equal to R double dot, where R is the position of the particle, instantaneous position of the particle, that can also be expressed as P dot by M, because you multiply by mass when defining the momentum, along the trajectory R of t due to the force F is determined by the following equation, which is already familiar to us. Mr double dot is equal to F, or equivalently P dot is equal to F. Okay, so this is Newton's second law. Again, I write here in an inertial frame. So this is Newton's second law. Now this law is valid. So you choose a frame, an inertial frame. Now within that frame, you can choose any coordinate system you like. Okay, you can choose spherical polars, you can use cylindrical coordinates, you can use ellipsoidal coordinates, you can use Cartesian coordinates, etc. So I make the distinction between a frame, a frame and a choice of coordinates in that frame. There's a slight additional data that's provided by the choice of coordinates. Yeah. Now, suppose that the equation I wrote down, Mr double dot equal to F, this equation, which relates to vectors, is valid no matter which coordinate system you pick. Yeah, whether you choose to work with Cartesian coordinates or polar coordinates, This equation is still valid. However, if you work in Cartesian coordinates, then we can write the trajectory as r of t as a triple x1, x2, x3 or xyz. And then Newton's equation, Newton's second law, becomes in component form mxi double dot is equal to fi. Okay, mxi double dot is equal to fi, where I runs from 1, 2 to 3. Okay. Now, this component form of the equation, component form of Newton's equation, is valid only in Cartesian coordinates. Okay, it changes if you go to curvilinear coordinates, such as spherical polar coordinates. Okay, in fact, this is something we have already observed. While r double dot is simply xi double dot in Cartesian coordinates, in spherical polar coordinates there were a lot more terms. Okay, there were even cross terms involved: theta dot, phi dot, r dot, theta dot. There were lots of terms. Okay, it's not as simple. So, for instance, in curvilinear coordinates, there could be terms in the acceleration and in components of the acceleration involving products of first derivatives of the coordinates, in addition to naive second derivative acceleration terms. Okay, so this is something important to bear in mind. I cannot simply write down Newton's second law in component form in curvilinear coordinates in this manner. Okay, we need to do something. What do we need to do? We may transform the equation from Cartesian coordinates to the desired system to find the form it takes. So this is a warning or a caution that we should bear in mind. Okay. Any questions so far on our discussion of Newton's second law?
So could you repeat the last part? I didn't really catch it.
Okay. Yes. Good question. Now, let me recall that in Cartesian coordinates, r is x1, x2, x3, or xyz. All right. Now, in plane polar coordinates, or let me work in 2 dimensions. Okay, let me drop the third one for simplicity. In plane polar coordinates, r is you have 2 coordinates, namely r and theta. Yes, and the acceleration is not simply r double dot r hat plus theta double dot theta hat. Okay, this is emphatically wrong. Yeah, whereas in in Cartesian coordinates, it is certainly true that the acceleration is given by x double dot x hat plus y double dot y hat. It is this distinction that I am making.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Okay. So if we define some variable called, let us call it xi, xi1 and xi2 as r and theta, and somewhat naively write down Newton's second law as mxi double dot is equal to fi, this will not be true. Okay, because the acceleration in polar coordinates is not simply r double dot and theta double dot. There are other terms. There are cross terms. Okay, there are things like r times theta, cosine theta, and such things. Okay, so that is all I'm saying. So, Rooptak, is that clear?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Okay, good. Okay, fine. Any other question about Newton's second? Yes.
I have a doubt, sir. This is
Yes.
Srimati. So,
Yes.
force. I mean, I didn't quite understand how we define force. Like force. You said we're not going to define it explicitly now, but like we've connected it to like acceleration, which we defined earlier, right? So, are we basically are we defining it in terms of acceleration?
Oh, no. No, not quite. Force is some new concept that we are deducing from experience. Okay, so acceleration was defined by looking at a trajectory or some curve and differentiating it twice along the curve. I mean, the position twice along the curve. So it was a geometric quantity that you could define that way. Unfortunately, force doesn't have such a definition, at least not at this stage. So that is why I said, so for us, a force will simply be some vector field or some vector that is gotten from experience. And so we are going to talk about it in that way. If you give me a force, I can write down second law of Newton. No, the force is not defined as mr double dot. Definitely not. In fact, it is in practice, it is the opposite often. Somebody tells you what the force is, and then you find the acceleration from the force. That is the direct problem that one often addresses. So yeah. So yes, so that is why I said we are not defining a force by this equation. Yeah, what is a force? Answer is my tugging at this bottle's cap is a force. Okay, so I am defining it through examples. I know you feel very bad about this, but for now, this is the best we can do. Yeah, so the force will be deduced from experiment. What force acts in this context has to be deduced from experiment. And but there is something to what you're saying. We are often in the position of assuming that Newton's second law holds and using it to deduce the force. All right, by observing the acceleration of particles. Okay, so though I am not saying that this is the definition of the force, there are situations where we use this equation to deduce what the force must be. So that too happens. Okay, so all I can say now is fasten your seatbelt, because we are going to have to interpret these equations in different ways, and you may feel at times that the foundations are imperfect, and that is where we always appeal to the experiment. That is our foundation. Okay, so any further question about that? That was from Srimati. Yeah.
Yes.
So
okay,
can we think of this
Can
like
you
this?
say that force is something?
wait, Ripunjay was speaking. Could you please just complete?
Yes, sir. So, sir, I was thinking like, can we think of this thing as like force is measured in terms of the rate of change of momentum? So we have like made a correspondence between two. Like for example, how much hardworking a student is, we can vaguely like characterize it in terms of the marks or percentage. Like this it leads to. So
Okay, so yeah, see, it really depends on the context. You're right. If a particle seems to accelerate more, you would say that there is a larger force acting on it. So to that extent, you are right. I mean, your comparison with the person getting a higher grade may suggest the person is working harder. Sure. Yeah. But yes. So we will see. The thing is that what we will do in practice is that we will, in some cases, we will assume that Newton's second law holds, all right, and then use it to determine the force by observing the acceleration of particles, all right. There are other contexts in which somebody proposes that this is the force based on their insight or their knowledge or their connection with nature, or they simply told you that. All right, all these are fine. Yeah, I mean, so in those contexts, you will take that force as given, and then you may be able to deduce the motion of particles. But okay, let me do this in a bit more careful way. All right, you first do an experiment where you have a particle, you observe its motion. By observing its motion, you deduce that, okay, there must have been a force field of this sort. All right, you establish that much by observing the motion of a particle, and a little bit of logic and some mathematics and some guesswork and some assumptions. Yeah, yeah, and also ignoring certain effects and so on. All right, so it's a very complicated process. By observing some motion of some particles, you deduce that there must be some force. All right, so that is called the inverse problem, the determination of the force from the observation of particle motion. Now, having done that, you close that chapter, you go to the next chapter, where now you take that deduced force as input, take some new particles, give them different initial conditions or manner of starting out. They will move in different ways, but you will be able to predict how they go based on the force you have deduced from the previous chapter. All right. This is called the direct problem, where the force is known to you based on previous experience or previous chapter's results. And now you can predict the motion of a particle. Okay. So physics goes back and forth between both of these, where now by using the known force, you calculate the trajectory of a particle. If it agrees well with what you see, you say, I'm happy. There is some small discrepancy. You may say, oh, no, the force I deduce is not quite that. I have to make some small correction. Then you improve it. You go back and forth this way. So Ripunjay, is that helpful?
Yes. So basically, like it's like summit of acceleration or the rate of change of momentum is our way of detecting a force or like perceiving a force, and based on this we can like go back and forth.
Correct. Exactly.
Sir,
yes.
Sir, another thing.
Yeah.
This is not related with this.
Sorry, who is speaking?
I just want. Sir, I am Ripunjay.
Okay, please go ahead.
So yeah, I just wanted to ask, like, when Newton wrote all of this in Principia, did he wrote or like did he also write about the inertial and non-inertial frame? So that was like figured out later on and somebody else introduced it.
No, these ideas were present at that time. Okay, maybe not in the manner I am saying, quite in the same manner, but no, these ideas were present. In fact, the idea of inertial frame already goes back to Galileo, who by the way died in the year 1642. That is the year in which Newton was born. So yeah, so these ideas, I mean, they got refined and are better understood later on, but the kernel of these ideas were present at that time. The manner of expression and precision of some of the statements may not be quite the same as we have now, but make no mistake, Newton had things figured out pretty well. In some ways ahead of his time.
So can we expect an explicit definition of force at some later point of time, or are we just going to assume this is what a force is?
Yeah, so this is from Saptarshi Sadhukan. So yeah, see, what I said is that, see, the force is a vector field. It is some vector that is defined at each point of the space in which the particle is moving. Now, so to that extent, that is a definition already. It is a vector field. Now you ask, which vector field is it? Now, how do you find that out? By doing experiments, like keeping particles, measuring how much they move, how fast they move, in which direction they move. You determine what the force at that point is. You repeat it somewhere else, you find what the force at that point is. This way you create a map of the force in the room. All right, then that is the force in the room due to the external influences and bodies present. That will be our working definition of the force. I think that is as good as any other, because it is also subject to improvement. You bring one more particle, check how it moves, you can improve your map of the force. Does this make sense?
Yes, sir. So it's like completely experimental.
Yes, it's a back and forth. It's a back and forth of the so-called inverse and direct problems. Force by definition is simply some vector field. All right, and there you can create pretty much any vector field you like by arranging objects in appropriate ways to create forces that you wish, right? So to that extent, it is a very, very general concept. But in a specific context, like in my room, what is the force present? To find out, you need to do experiments to find out. Then you will find the force field. Having found the force field, you can then predict the motion of new particles. That is where additional new results can be obtained. It is not purely experimental. Yeah, you give a vector field, you give a force field. I will tell you by solving the dynamical equations of Newton how particles are supposed to move or expected to move. Then you go back and check with the experiment. Is that how they move? If they do, you will be happy. If they don't, then either your determination of the force field was wrong or needs improvement, or Newton's second law itself is wrong. All right, or it was not an inertial frame. All of these options are open. Yeah, so I would yeah, when you say it is all experimental, I wouldn't quite say that. I mean, it is more nuanced in the manner I am trying to convey. Is that okay,
Yes,
Saptarshi?
sir. Yes. Yes, sir.
Okay, fine. Yeah. Any other question?
Yes, sir.
Yes, Shubham Kumar.
Sir, I'm just confirming, like, have we defined mass or the concept of mass till now? I mean,
Not in a seriously deep way. We have taken it as a property of a particle. Yeah. And we will, there are ways to measure the mass of a particle. Somewhat self-consistent methods. Yeah, but yes, I have not given some ab initio definition of a mass of particle. It is some attribute of the particle, which can be, which is some positive number, and in practice, yeah, if I have a particle, then I'm able somehow to assign some mass to it. If I make 2 copies of that particle and put them together, then the resulting composite particle has twice the mass. So using this, we can find the masses of other particles or compare particles and assign them masses. Yeah. Yes, in some ways, we will use Newton's second law to measure the mass of a particle in some context and so on. So yeah, so the process is not so straightforward. There are other mathematical definitions of what a mass is, using ideas from algebra and so on. Yeah, but that still, you want to find the mass of a particle, you need to do some experimentation and make some theoretical framework. See, the mass of a particle is not defined independently of the theoretical framework in which you speak of its mass, right? So it is partly dependent on the framework of Newtonian mechanics. Yeah, it is not some sort of independent concept. You do use the concepts of Galileo and Newton to measure the mass of a particle in some reliable fashion, which I'm not going into right now very much. Okay, that was Shubham. Does that help at all at this stage?
yes, sir. Thank you.
Okay, yeah. So Ishan Verma is asking, just to clarify, F equal to ma holds, but F is not defined as mass times acceleration. Okay, no, see, the thing is, the question is, how do you view this equation? How do you view this equation? There are different viewpoints on this equation. We now agree that, suppose we have determined that this lab, this room is an inertial frame. Now, however, this particle here, this bottle here is not free. When I drop it, it actually falls. It doesn't go in a straight line and doesn't travel at constant speed. Therefore, we deduce based on Newton's proposal that there must be a force. Now you ask, what is that force? Well, you determine it by observing the motion of this bottle. Okay, so that is the viewpoint we might take on this equation at this stage. That is a way we might determine the force by observing accelerations. So to that extent, your statement is true. The force is in this context defined as the mass times acceleration of an observed body. But putting together lots of such observed bodies, we get the force as a field everywhere in this room. Okay. And having done that, we store that information in a disk or somewhere, then use that information to deduce the motion of new particles that somebody may bring tomorrow. So Ishan Verma, is that clarify things at all? Okay, good. He says yes, it is clear now. Fine.
Sir, you just mentioned that you use certain ideas from algebra to define what the mass is. Is it like something to do with how the mass remains invariant if you like move the body, like translate or rotate the body? Is that Are those like the algebraic ideas or?
Yes, there is some concepts in algebra, I mean higher algebra, where one can determine that there is some kind of a parameter within that setup. There's some constant in that setup, which then you identify as the mass. It's some kind of invariant. I wouldn't call, it's a kind of invariant. Yeah, it's a kind of invariant.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Okay. So now let me then, unless there is, yes.
Could you please give an example where this way of defining force might not be might not hold? This way of defining the force, like F is equal to ma.
I'm afraid I don't understand your question. I mean,
is there any example, or is there any system of particles or system of motions where this equation might not hold, that F is equal to ma? Like you're saying that this
definitely.
is the way we define for a certain system.
No, yeah, you're right. See, as I have written here, this is valid in an inertial frame. So one place where this formula is simply not valid is in a non-inertial frame. Yeah, so if you go to some non-inertial frame, accelerated frame, or rotating frame, then this equation will not be exactly true. There will be correction terms. So yeah, that is one place where it simply fails.
Sir, is it also Brownian motion? Like,
No,
because the trajectory is not defined, so we can't have acceleration.
Correct. Yeah, there are contexts in which Newton's sort of that zeroth law itself fails, and then all this building that we are constructing on top of it all collapses. You're right. We cannot simply use this Newton's second law directly for Brownian motion. True. Yeah, and similarly, we cannot apply it directly to the motion of electrons in atoms or molecules. So yeah, there are many places where this law is simply of no use. We have to replace it or improve it and so on.
If the frame is inertial, will this always hold for every system? Like if we consider that system to be in that inertial frame? Yeah, within some approximations, right? When you ignore when we ignore things like quantum mechanical effects, when we ignore special relativistic effects, yes, within that approximation, it does hold. That is true. Yes. Yeah. Thank you. Sure. Okay. Then let me make a couple of additional comments on this Newton's second law, or things we observe from it. Yeah. Newton's second law, when written as mr double dot equal to F, is actually a system of three equations. Yeah, it's three equations. When I write it in component form in Cartesian coordinates, there are three equations, but each of those equations is a differential equation. Each of those equations is a second order differential equation. All right. So being second order in time, Newton's equation requires both the initial position r, let us say r of 0, r at time 0, as well as the velocity or momentum, that is r dot at 0 or p dot, sorry, p at 0. I'm sorry, not p dot, p at 0. Yeah. You need these two pieces of initial data or initial conditions. Something this is called initial data or initial conditions. Whereas a first order equation would only require one piece of initial data. So of course, because there are three equations, you will need 6 pieces of initial data, namely x of 0, y of 0, z of 0, x dot of 0, y dot of 0, and z dot of 0. Okay, so you will need 6 pieces of initial data to understand the solution of this equation completely. Okay. Now I bring in an important concept, namely that the knowledge of the current position and momentum, see, they often switch between velocity and momentum. They only differ by multiplication by mass. So for many purposes, we'll talk in terms of momentum. So let me repeat.
knowledge of the current position and momentum determines the trajectory of the particle via Newton's second law equation. Okay, so you need the initial conditions consisting of both the initial position as well as the momentum, which in conjunction with Newton's second law differential equation allows you to determine the trajectory. Okay. When I say allows you to determine, I mean in a very simple sense, mx, let me do one dimension, m, let me just think of it as p dot is equal to f, yeah. Then it will say that p of t plus delta t minus p of t is equal to delta t times f at time t. So if you know the momentum at the initial instant of time, yeah, then of course the force itself may depend on x at time t, yeah. Then this equation, when you take it to the other side, will tell you what momentum at t plus delta t is. Okay, I mean this is for small delta t. It's equal to p at time t plus delta t times f at x at t. Okay. So this is the sense in which Newton's equation allows you to determine the momentum at the next instant of time, knowing the momentum at the present instant of time, as well as the position at the present instant of time. Okay, and then you will integrate the second equation, namely x dot is equal to p by m, to find x at the next instant of time. So to summarize, the knowledge of where you are and where you are going, together with Newton's second law, determines your future trajectory. It is not enough to know where you are. You need to know where you are and where you are going in order to use Newton's second law to find your future evolution. That is because it is a second order equation. Okay. So bearing this in mind, we define a new concept called the state of a particle. So this was something that had been asked about earlier by, I think, Siddhant Shah. Earlier, we had talked about only the location of objects. The current location of a particle was called its current configuration. But if you append to that the additional information, not just of where it is located, but which way it is moving and at what speed, namely give both its current location and momentum, or current location and velocity, those two together define the state, the current state of the particle. Okay, so state here is a technical term. The state of a particle is specified by giving its instantaneous position and momentum. Okay, so we have defined a new concept called the state of a system or the state of a particle. Knowledge of current state of the particle along with Newton's second law determines its future behavior. Okay, so let me write that here. Knowledge of current state of particle along with Newton's second law, NSL, determines its future evolution. When I say evolution, I mean trajectory. Okay. So any question about these concepts of Newton's second law, as well as this idea of the state?
So what is it, NSL? Knowledge of current state of particle along with NSL.
Newton's second law, NSL.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay. Any other question? All right. So, by the way, before I forget, I believe that there is going to be a internet downtime here shortly after 1:10 or so. So in case my connection to the internet is cut off, it just means that the class is over at that time. But I've requested that it not happen before 1:10 or so. So let us hope that we are able to go on till then. Okay. So now let me go on to, okay, there's one more definition I wish to make. It is, which we have already done, but I just want to emphasize it once again with our newfound knowledge. The path of the particle satisfying Newton's equation and initial condition is called its trajectory. Okay. So the trajectory is now a distinguished concept. It's not any old curve. It is the curve that satisfies both the initial conditions as well as Newton's equation. Okay. Such a curve is called the trajectory of a particle. As always, trajectories are oriented by arrows specifying the forward evolution of time. All right. So, okay. Let us now go on to another very interesting and in some ways concept that predated Newton's second law. I mean, in fact, predated Newton's laws themselves. And this is Galileo's principle of relativity. I hope you will understand it even better now that you have some background on Newton's laws. It actually motivates the nature of Newton's second law. Yeah, I mean, the formulation of it, why it is in this manner. Galileo's principle will help us understand that. Okay. So, as I said, Newton stood on the shoulders of Galileo in many ways, and Galileo died in the year 1642, in which Newton was born. Okay, so I mean, Newton is from which country?
England.
Yeah, and what about Galileo?
Sir, Italy.
Yeah, right on both counts. Okay, so now we notice that Newton's second law. Oops, what happened? Yeah, sorry. Notice that Newton's second law relates the force to the second derivative of position along a trajectory. We have been commenting about this, but we are going to give some physical reason why this is the case. Yeah, as opposed to say the first derivative or third derivative or fourth derivative, etc. All right. So Newton's second law is very specific. It relates the force to the second derivative of position. Why is this? Well, Newton did it this way in order to incorporate Galileo's relativity principle. Now let us understand what that relativity principle or observation was. Roughly speaking, what Galileo postulated or proposed. So Milan Paul is asking, sir, how did Newton arrive at second law? Okay, I am addressing that question to some extent. Yeah. So maybe this will help answering Milan Paul's question. Yeah, that is why is it the second derivative of position and not something else? Yeah, I mean, I think also a lot of experimentation was involved, that observing things falling on the earth, and there must be something that is causing this falling, and that something was encoded in a force field because it was present everywhere. I mean, cell phones fall here, so do they fall there? So, and there's a manner in which they fall. So there is some kind of field which tells you which way they fall and how fast they fall. So that was put inside something called a vector field or the force field. And then the question is, how does that force field affect the motion? I mean, does it directly affect the velocity? Does it affect the acceleration? Does it affect directly the position? Yeah, there are all these possibilities. And by using the insights from Galileo, Newton zeroed in on the second derivative. Yeah. So I hope Milan Paul's question will be addressed in the coming minutes, at least in part. And I will say more about this also as we go along. But we must also be understanding of the fact that at the end of the day, it's a proposal. Newton's second law is a proposal. Now, there are many other possibilities, and we may be able to eliminate some of them using Galileo's principle or using certain experiments and observations. But it doesn't mean it's the only possibility, or that later studies will just will always confirm it. They may say that it's not quite right, we have to change it. And that is what has happened. It is good to some approximation in certain contexts, but there are places it fails, where we understand the dynamics in different ways. Okay, so what does Galileo's relativity principle say? It says roughly that there is no dynamical way, that is through the performance of mechanical experiments, through the study of motion of particles and bodies, no dynamical way of telling if a frame is at rest or moving uniformly relative to an inertial frame. Okay. So this is a very important observation that Galileo is proposing. Galileo is suggesting that there is no way to tell whether, let us think of the Earth as an inertial frame for now. Now, when I say Earth again, let me be more clear. That is, this room is an inertial frame. Let us work within that hypothesis. Now, there is no way to tell whether a frame is at rest or uniformly moving relative to an inertial frame. Okay, that is, suppose we consider another room that is moving uniformly, and somebody sits inside that room and performs mechanical experiments. Yeah, that person cannot determine whether their car, in which I call it a room, let's call it a car. Yeah, that person cannot determine that that car is moving uniformly relative to the Earth, or is at rest relative to the Earth. Okay, so this is what Galileo is proposing. Well, Galileo proposed it not in cars but in ships. So let me say that. So in 1632, Galileo Galilei observed that it was not possible to detect the uniform motion of a ship, that is constant velocity motion, without rocking. Okay, so you have a ship that's moving in a river, or a large boat that's moving in a river or in the sea. Suppose it is not shaking and so on, so it's moving uniformly. Then Galileo says that an observer who is sitting inside the ship, not looking out doesn't count as mechanical experiments. Yeah, so that's why he said, by performing mechanical experiments under the deck of the ship, okay, so without looking outside, yeah, performing mechanical experiments sitting under the deck of the ship so that you cannot look outside, it is not possible for that observer in the ship to tell whether the ship is at rest relative to the Earth or is moving uniformly. Okay. So this was Galileo's proposal, and this is called Galileo's principle of relativity. Yeah. Now, let me say that again, because it is a very important observation and has remained with us in physics well beyond Newtonian mechanics. This principle continues in suitable form to be valid in relativistic mechanics as well. So in 1632, Galileo Galilei observed that it was not possible to detect the uniform motion of a ship relative to the shore by performing mechanical experiments under the deck of the ship. Okay, so this is Galileo's proposal. And this proposal is elevated to the principle of Galilean relativity, which states that the laws of mechanics must take the same form in two inertial frames that are in uniform motion relative to each other. Okay. So the impossibility of detecting uniform motion relative to the shore is then abstracted, and we say that the laws of physics in both these frames, namely the shore frame and the ship's frame, must take the same form, so that you cannot tell from those equations or the consequences of the equations which frame is at rest, which frame is moving. Yeah, you cannot tell without looking outside. Okay, so so according to Galileo, there is no concept of absolute rest. Okay. So just as a remark, as I mentioned earlier, Galileo's principle of relativity continues to hold in special relativistic mechanics. Yeah, that is beyond Newtonian mechanics. Some modification is needed, namely to accommodate the constancy of the speed of light. Einstein had to modify the transformation rule that relates the coordinates in two frames that are in uniform motion relative to each other. So Einstein had to do some other modification in order to accommodate the constancy, finiteness, or speed of light, but he did not tamper with Galileo's principle of relativity. That continues to hold. Yeah. So first of all, I want to emphasize that suppose a ship is at rest on in the dock, it's docked. A person inside does some experiments using particles, yeah, springs and so on. Some particles, falling bodies, yeah, collisions of balls, things of that sort. Find some results. Okay. Then somebody makes that ship move at constant speed. Yeah, I mean, of course, you have to start it moving, then it reaches some constant velocity. Then that person does those same experiments. By looking at the results of those experiments and comparing with the results of the previous experiments, the person inside cannot tell that the ship had started moving. Okay, this is what Galileo is saying. Okay. Okay. Yeah. All right. So Ripunjay asks, sir, this proposal doesn't necessarily imply the order of differential equation to be greater than 1, but not necessarily second order, right? Yeah. So yes, I am going to comment on this. Sure. Yeah. So Ripunjay's question is going to be addressed in a moment. Yeah. So the order of the differential equation is related to Galileo's principle, and I will address it, but it doesn't constrain it completely. Perhaps that is what you're alluding to. Yeah, Galileo's principle does not imply that it has to be second order. It allows for more possibilities, which then you have to eliminate using additional physical information, other experiments, etc. Yeah, so okay. Any question about the statement of Galileo's principle? All right. Now, in Galilean relativity, we make some assumptions, which I have not, I mean, I have mentioned them before, but I want to emphasize them once again now. First is that the mass of a particle is the same in the two frames. Okay, so that is important, whether we are in the frame of the shore or the frame of the uniformly moving ship. The mass of a particle is the same. Okay. I mean, the mass of a particular particle is the same. So that is one assumption. Second assumption is that both observers use the same scale for measuring distances. Okay. Yeah, I had commented about this before. I will repeat it again in a moment. And the third assumption is that both observers agree on the time interval between any pair of events. Okay. So these are all assumptions that go into Newtonian mechanics, and in particular Galilean relativity, as it is called. So in other words, uniformly moving measuring sticks have the same length as when they are observed at rest. Okay? So suppose I have a stick here, I say it is 10 centimeters long. Now suppose the stick is moving and I somehow measure its length, I will get the same 10 centimeters. Okay? So this is the this is what is observed to good approximation, and this is an assumption that goes into Galilean relativity. And similarly, a clock that is moving at a constant velocity neither slows down nor speeds up relative to a clock at rest. Okay, so a clock at rest, if it shows a certain time interval, a uniformly moving clock that were synchronized initially will agree on their times later on also.